Good morning. Welcome. Thank you guys for coming. Today we're starting to talk about startups, DC, and what the U.S. Chamber of Commerce does. So let's start with myth busting. Is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce a part of the federal government?
No. Good morning. So I have the privilege of running the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's a 110-year-old institution, a brand that everyone's heard of and no one knows what it is. So thank you for the question. We spend all of our time trying to create space where you can be creators. So we spend all of our time thinking about how and what a job means to a family, to a community, to our country, to our national security, and then helping entrepreneurs grow, small businesses grow, big businesses employ people, and solve the problems society wants them to solve. So it's really about helping you network, connect, inform, and advocating on your behalf so we can help government create the conditions where you can be successful and you can run your business.
And another myth about the Chamber of Commerce is that you represent just big business.
90% of our members are small businesses. Sometimes that means one employee or even a half of an employee, somebody trying to start something on the side while they're working full time. And a lot of small and chambers across the country and trade associations that represent entrepreneurs.
Which leads us to your personal story. So you've been an entrepreneur, and that informs how you lead at the Chamber. Tell us a little bit about your bio in that space and how it affects this big job that you have now.
Niki asks that question so elegantly, but the truth is she is a founder too. And so the two of us usually over a glass of wine have this conversation. It goes something like this. Being a founder, having any kind of startup, is the most rewarding thing you can possibly do, like watching your product or service or idea come to life, the first time you see your logo, the first big contract that you get, like you just can't believe that your idea is working, right? The first time you create a job for somebody else, the first time you solve a problem somebody else has, the thrill of that feeling I think is really unbeatable. It's also completely terrifying to make a payroll as you grow. I remember one time we had a big company want us to expand our services, and going home and explaining to my husband the savings we were going to have to liquidate in order for me to hire the people that could fulfill that contract. It made growth scary, and so my joke to Niki is always, being an entrepreneur felt nauseating and thrilling and wonderful and exciting and fulfilling and terrifying. The problem is it felt those things usually before lunch every day, all of them.
It's true that we do talk about this. So I have a very small business. I have 3 employees, one of whom, Lucy, is based in Texas. And I feel completely freaked out on a regular basis. And I'm like, can I quit this job that I started? I'm not quitting, Lucy. But it is harrowing, and it's also a totally different skill set, right? So you aren't just creating the work and doing the work and selling or working with clients. You also have to think about operations, which is exhausting and aggravating and not necessarily something as an entrepreneur that you have a background in.
I don't know how many of you have gone from big to small, but I think suddenly being an entrepreneur, I'm like, where's the legal department? Oh, I'm the legal department. Where's HR? Oh, wait, I'm HR. Oh, wait a minute, trying to be IT, being all of your departments at one time. And I'm phenomenally bad at most of those jobs.
Same. And also, I didn't start anything. And we can talk a little bit about your background too and how you were at the Chamber, left, and then came back and why. But I hadn't started anything until I'd been working in big companies and big organizations for 20 years. So I don't have that skill set. So it's something you're learning to do on the fly while making payroll and in a moment, which we're also going to talk about. There are a lot of headwinds for businesses big and small right now. But tell a little bit about your trajectory, why you came back, and how you think about small businesses because of your experience.
Look, I think what happened to me, and I did have a successful exit, but the problem is you don't know you're going to have a successful exit at any point, right? And so the fear that you have, that you're putting everything you have into your business, your startup, your idea, and yet you have no idea if it's going to be successful, is hard, and it's lonely. It's lonely to do that. And so what happened was that as I was having an exit, I had a great banker who said, you really don't want to be here, right? Or they're going to think they're buying you. And at the time I had a young child, and they're like, the likely buyer wasn't domestic. It turned out to be a domestic buyer, but at the time we didn't think it would be. You don't want me back and forth to the UK on a plane all the time, proving your numbers. So you want to distance yourself from the business as you're exiting. And so I did. And at the time, my old boss at the U.S. Chamber, where I'd been earlier in my career, his wife was ill. And so I thought I was going back for a year to sell my business, get that over the hump, and then help my friend in the chamber, which I cared about at that time. But then the pandemic hit. And it really became a passion play for me because we were watching small businesses just really struggle. We were watching local chambers go out of business. And so the idea that we could do anything to help a single business stay in business, to help a chamber stay in business, to help a chamber help a business stay in business, became a real passion play. And I ended up deciding I really wanted to run the chamber and going for the job.
Which leads us to a slightly hard pivot, but is necessary, which is the title of this panel, How DC Wants to Mess with Your Startup, on a morning in which DC just stepped in to help a bunch of startups. So it's a little bit of an elephant in the room, but let's talk a little bit about Silicon Valley Bank. And I think there's an idea that the Chamber of Commerce is just sort of anti-government intervention or anti-regulation altogether. And this morning, and obviously this is a fast evolving situation, but this morning we see the government stepping in and helping a bank that banks venture capitalists and founders. And I lived in Silicon Valley for 6 years, so I know people who personally bank there. I think it's a good moment for you to talk about exactly how you think about the government and engaging with the government, what their role is and should be.
Yeah, thank you for that. Look, you can't be anti-government. It's like being anti-air, right? Of course we need a government. There are things that only government can do. I mean, when I stop at a red light, I would like to know. When I go through a green light, I want to know the other people are stopping at a red light, right? I want to eat in restaurants and believe that there is food safety regulation. I want my daughter to have clean drinking water, right? So there are really important roles for laws and for regulations. And even beyond that, there are things that only the federal government can do, right? Only the federal government can make immigration law and border security law. Only a federal government can do trade law. Only a federal government can run a national highway system or a national railroad system. So there are really important roles for the government to play. One of the fears we have at the U.S. Chamber, however, is that when government tries to do too much, it stops being good at the things that only they can do. So part of our role at the Chamber is to be a good partner to government. What does that mean? It means bringing them professional expertise. It means helping to be a trusted partner, bringing them business leaders. I would love to hear all of your stories and get all of your cards, because here's the type of thing that happens to me. The labor secretary calls and says, I don't really understand the worker shortage. What are CEOs really saying? Can you get me someone real? Like, not someone who wants to lobby me, but can explain the problem, right? So part of our job is to bring you and real stories to the government so that when they act, it's actually helpful, right?
So I want to talk a little bit more about this. So your job is basically, you talk to CEOs all day long. Mm-hmm. What are you hearing from CEOs right now in this moment in time?
Well, it's interesting. We had a dinner last night with 15 CEOs. And again, people have one employee and an executive from Volkswagen who, as she said, has more than one employee. I think their number is 600,000 or something, right? But I heard the same thing there across industry, across geography, across size of business that we really hear everywhere, which is people feel pretty strongly in the fundamentals of their own business. Like, I feel good about what I can do, what I can provide, what my customers will pay, et cetera. But they have a kind of second-hand pessimism. Like, I'm confident, but I don't know about the macroeconomy. Or I'm confident, but I don't know if government's going to do the right thing and get me the workers or the permits that I really need. So I hear a lot of, I'm okay, but I'm worried about the macroeconomy, and I'm worried about the ability of government to do the right thing to help.
One thing, just continuing on that, you mentioned permitting, and I have to say, I actually recognize some swamp dwellers in the audience, and we're always, down on Congress can't get anything done, but Congress has gotten several things done this year that are good for businesses. But I wanted to talk for a minute about permitting and infrastructure and how I think you have a take on this, an opinion.
Yeah, but here's the problem. This is where none of you want to have a coffee with me, because I use boring words like permitting. So just try to stick with me for 30 seconds on this really boring concept, except there'll be some of you who understand it even better than I do. So here's the deal. In the United States, it takes on average 7 years to get a permit for an energy project or an infrastructure project. If it's a really complex project, it's more like 10 years. So it doesn't matter what you want to build. Let's talk about energy. It doesn't matter what you believe about the future of energy in the United States. If you want to build anything, you're talking a 7-year permitting process. That makes it really hard for investors to invest, for people to decide to do the project here and not someplace else, for companies to make a long-term plan. Again, in terms of the role of government, a lot of what we hear from business is, I just want certainty. I just want to know what the rules of the road are going to be. I want it to not change every 2 or 4 years of the political cycle. Just tell me what the rules are, I'll make my plan, and we'll go. So the real issue on permitting reform is, I think there's a chance that this Congress will get it done, but if it doesn't, then a lot of the stuff that's in the CHIPS Act, a lot of the stuff that was in the Infrastructure Act, things that could be really good for America's economy and competitiveness won't be able to be built.
So speaking of certainty, I noticed one reporter in the audience who covers competition and the FTC. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the chamber with some of the agencies right now. And I think one misconception, I think I said this already, is that you guys represent big business. But in fact, some of the engagement you have with the agencies like the FTC will have benefits for small companies. So if you're a small company, you're a startup, and one of your dream is an acquisition, that's your most successful exit. If you look at the FTC, I'm not gonna put words in your mouth. What do you think's happening at the FTC right now?
I don't know, I wanted to hear the end of yours, what you think is happening at the FTC.
Look, I have a lot of thoughts on what's happening at the FTC.
What we're concerned about is that when the FTC chair goes on record and says it's her job to redistribute power in the economy, we don't believe that's her job. We're not sure anyone elected anyone to redistribute power in the economy, certainly not at the FTC. For decades, there has been bipartisan consensus on what type of M&A work should be approved. And it was all based on the consumer welfare standard. Are consumers harmed by a lack of competition if these two companies get together, or are consumers benefited, or does it not matter? But now we have an FTC that's kind of just deciding all big is bad. And the problem is, as the old saying goes, no one ever built an airplane in their garage, right? Some things have to be big. They're that capital intensive. But also, it misses the point that the entire economy is an ecosystem. You can't like small and not like big. They're vendors, employees, funders, partners, customers of each other. So to pretend that you only like one part of the economy is to really misunderstand it. What we most want from the FTC, again, is certainty. What types of deals will get approved? What I worry about for the startup people I know is that the bigger companies are starting to say, I don't know what can get approved, and so why am I putting any energy or money towards M&A work right now? Because it's just such a black box. I was on CNBC one day making this argument, and I got a call from a big company CEO who said, you know, I couldn't start, he was a private company, he said, I couldn't start my business today. And I worry that I did great and my kids did great and we built a great thing in our community, but I don't know that I could do it now. And I just got denied a merger. They won't tell me why. I was going to acquire a company and I'm going to be fine. But they're not going to be fine because we're going to head into a recession, and I think they missed their window for an exit. So what we're pushing for is that we have a good FTC, but that we understand what the rules are, and we understand what can be acquired and what can't, so that as you're growing your business, you understand what your potential exits are. And people who are interested in partnering with you understand when they can and when they can't.
I think that's also, we've talked about this a little bit. So I worked at Google for 8 years. I think we had at the time 400 in-house attorneys. Google's going to be fine. It doesn't really even matter what the government does. They're going to have the resources to litigate, to engage, to lobby. But the externalities are for the small companies who can't afford that. And I've heard you say, again, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but I've heard you talk about the cost of having lawyers lawyering, the cost to businesses.
Well, it's both things, right? The truth is that every time a big company is spending all of that money on lawyers, they're not spending money on employees, on partnerships, on contracts with small businesses, on innovation. So it's not great for a big company either, right? I mean, I'm married to a lawyer. I'm not trying to throw away the whole profession, but that is not the most productive use of Google's resources, I would argue, right? But for a small business, it's even worse. And so we have a good website called Co, where we really try to put up free resources all the time to small businesses to try to navigate these waters. And we try to get big companies to use their resources and their expertise to give that away for free. So that even if you're a small business without teams of in-house counsel, you have a chance to really understand what the rules of the road are. I would also make a plug for We do want to hear your stories, and frequently we have people who can step in and help you, and we have people who will pay for that. And so if you find yourself confused by regulations or confused about what's getting approved or not approved, let us know.
I actually think that's the main, I mean, in my opinion, one of the main things you guys do is provide like a force extender for people with really small DC teams. So I have been at startups in Washington where my team was too small to track everything happening, privacy, competition, new rules for ESG, whatever it was. We just didn't have enough people. So it's a way to plug in to a bigger community of resources.
I think that's right, and I think it applies to government too. So if you think about, we just did this AI commission where we spent a year traveling the country, going to the UK, putting together panels of people, really trying to think about what was being developed in artificial intelligence and what it would mean, and how the government could help create space that could help the United States really compete and take advantage of all of the potential benefits of AI, but also regulate it in a way that reinforces our values and what we believe. In other words, if we let Europe or China or a different country or set of countries set the rules of the road for AI, we risk being left behind. So what is the appropriate role for the regulator in AI? So we spent a year trying to understand this, trying to figure out what was out there. And it's again where we really need your stories. So to give you an example, at this dinner last night, we were laughing about, do we need, and it's really not funny. I actually, the more I say it, the more I actually want to do it. Do we need a National Guard where people from the tech community spend a weekend a month helping educate the government on all of technology and what it means? Because it's really hard to regulate well something that you just don't understand. And I would argue almost no one understands what's happening in particular with AI. So what is it that we want a good government that's good at what they do, right? So this question of how do we help that? How are we trusted sources of information? How do we learn from the tech community so that what we're advocating for really helps and doesn't hurt? I think it's something we need to work on together.
I agree, and I think actually that there should be more interest from tech companies themselves in giving people fellowships to go into the government. The U.S. Digital Service does great work, but they're a small team in the White House. But I think that, I won't make you talk about crypto, but I'll briefly talk about crypto because I've sort of fallen like backwards into crypto. But I think that's a space where people in the who work in the government can't interact with the asset. So they're regulating something they don't have familiarity with. And I think AI is another it's abstract to a lot of people, not specific. Just to go into like a few, I won't take credit for this, but I worked with you guys on the AI commission. One of the hearings was in Austin. And in Austin, there was a big focus on entrepreneurs and innovation. Cleveland was a focus on healthcare. DC was a rather harrowing hearing on national security. And so the recommendations came out last Thursday. So you've just launched this report, which seems like miraculous timing, but you've been working on it for a year.
Well, it's like all of you feel, right? All the people that tell you how lucky your timing was, and you think, God, that was years of hard work that went into that luck. I mean, this team worked pretty hard on it. But again, I think it's filling a real need. I forget the name of the White House agency that put out a blueprint for AI, Tom, a year ago?
6 months.
6 months ago. And not well done. I mean, really some basic errors, even in definition, that would start to regulate some basic computing that isn't AI. And so it points to, we just don't want to fight bad regulation. We're happy to do that, right? We spend some fair amount of time going to court and suing the government for bad regulation we don't think they had the authority to promulgate. Someone has to do that to keep government in their lane. But what you really want is good regulation, right? So the launch of the Commission's recommendations last week was one important step, but now the work starts on how do we really get good regulation in this space.
I'm glad you mentioned litigation, which maybe this is like you talking about permitting, but I think—
why I don't get invited to parties.
Why neither of us get invited to parties. So one of the most important things you do is act as a plaintiff for agencies. And this includes, because there's also a stereotype about who knows right now who's like on the right or left or center in Washington. It's like the border of that keeps moving. But one of the things you do is sue over sort of bungled regulations that came out of the last administration, because you have to have a plaintiff to come to a decision so that businesses can have certainty. I think that's quiet work that you guys do, but should probably get more attention. It's really important.
Yeah, and again, we're always looking for the stories of how regulation is impacting business. And we don't want to just hear big company stories. So we're looking for what's happening out there in the economy all the time through our state and local chambers. But we do have a team of former Supreme Court clerks who are looking at cases that really set economic precedent. So to be really clear about this, if you think about how big the regulatory agencies have gotten, and it was really not seen in the early days of the founding of this country that was going to be a whole branch of government that would be this big. Technically, a regulatory agency is only supposed to do what the Congress gives it authority to do. And yet we frequently see these agencies way outstepping that bound. And again, I don't want to confuse that with the fact that a lot of these agencies don't have good and real work to do, protecting companies, protecting families. But when they get out of bounds, when they grow too big, when the tax is too high on innovation and competition, then we will step in and we will sue and we will likely win.
Great, I love it. I'm for that. So one other thing I wanted to talk about is, as a small business owner, and again, I'm conscious that this morning the government has done something that really is helping a lot of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, and these apps that we all use, people don't realize that they banked with Silicon Valley Bank. I mean, maybe we're realizing it now, but you said something really smart about social media and its role in what's happening with government, and I think that would be interesting to people.
Look, I think it's an important morning for a lot of us to be quiet, right? It's an important morning to get smarter and to do the homework of really understanding what happened. The rush on Twitter or on the morning news to say, I know what the solution is, it's more regulation. I know what the solution is, it's less regulation. I don't think we know anything. I don't think we know if the San Francisco Fed did their job. I don't know if we know if the regulators had tools they just weren't using. I don't think we know yet. I do think we know that the FDIC is simply exercising muscle it has all the time. Right? I mean, Tom was saying this morning during the financial crisis, he was getting lists of dozens of banks every Friday that the FDIC was closing, right? This is muscle. It's why you have an FDIC. So it seems shocking because it's the 16th largest bank, but this is what the FDIC knows how to do, right? And it's doing the right thing and taking care of depositors. People who deposited money in a bank should be able to get that money out, and giving it time and space to liquidate assets to do that is smart. I think the thing that we really should study that's new is what the role of social media was in this. And, you know, we were laughing about the fact that we all know it's illegal to yell fire in a theater, right? You're not supposed to do that. Does it count if you yell fire on Twitter? What are all of our responsibilities about that? And what happened on Twitter? And so the real questions that I think will come out are, you know, to quote Billy Joel, we didn't start the fire. You know, who did start the fire? What happened there? Was it used responsibly? And as we think about our own role in public messaging and public confidence, in being holders of public trust, thinking about what we say in public, it's important. I really hate about current society that we have this end of expertise. You know, everybody's been to schools, so we know what teachers should do. Everybody has WebMDs, so we know what doctors should do. You know, everybody has access to the Google machine, so they can have their version of history or facts. And the truth is, there are experts. And what are we going to do as a society to say that that's true and hold up some expertise? Because if everybody's voice is the same, if everybody's expertise is the same, then what happens to trust? And what happens to trust in the system? And I think that's scary.
It is scary. I chuckled because it's harrowing. And one of my tweets I saw earlier this year was someone who knew absolutely nothing about Ukraine weighing in about Ukraine and then said, don't let people expert shame you. It doesn't matter. You're not an expert. And I thought, I feel like we should shame you for not being an expert and talking about this on Twitter.
Or is it okay, like we would at a family dinner table, to have an opinion and ask questions of experts and challenge experts? Yeah, that's a really important role in democracy too, but that's different than pretending to be an expert.
For sure. And I know that you will be tracking this, but I am, you know, in the aftermath of what happened over the weekend and as we see what happens over the next few days, will there be more scrutiny on the way people talk about things and tell people what to do and give advice on social media? Because it's certainly prohibited in real life some of the behavior that we saw on Twitter, but essentially we saw the first Twitter incited bank run in history. So I'm sure you will be tracking that.
Again, I think it's gonna be really interesting if what is self-policing, what is opinion, what is a town square, and what is an expert scaring the heck out of people. And are those things different? And this goes back to why we need a really good, smart, nuanced government. And what keeps me up at night is that I worry that too often the last words you associate with government are balanced and nuanced, no matter which side of the aisle you're on, right? So what is expertise? What is balance? What is nuance? And one of the things that's freaked me out this year is kind of people in the extremes of both parties wanting to take down tech. And they talk about tech as if it's monolithic and one definition and one thing, as opposed to narrowing down what it is they're upset about and what should be done about it. But I keep thinking that our adversaries around the globe are laughing their way to the bank. It's the one thing they can't build. It's the one thing they can't figure out about the United States is our tech industry and our innovation and the global dominance. And so we're going to take it down ourselves? That's the plan.
Preach. I mean, so I think we're in this moment where there are economic headwinds, there's uncertainty, there's a perceived pessimism. I almost think we're creating a recession by talking constantly about the recession, even though consumer spending is sky high. Yeah. I think we're in a moment where, I'm literally stealing this from Lucy, who's sitting in the audience. We were having dinner last night, but we're in a moment where it may not be that the same rules apply on how people are motivated to work and what that means for them. And businesses are under this, and CEOs, and I would put myself in this position too, even of a tiny company, of trying to create a workplace that inspires and makes money and can survive when there's headwinds. Capitalism is falling out of favor, and yet, to your point, we've created so much good in the world by fostering tech innovations. I think we often focus on social media versus the magical things that we have every day and that we're still creating. That wasn't a question, I will ask you.
It wasn't, but I'll.
It was a statement.
What
do you think?
But I'll comment on it, which is, look, I think when you talk to CEOs, particularly small businesses, and particularly small businesses that are providing a really unique service to their community. So in this case, I might not even be talking about the startup founder tech entrepreneur, right? I might be talking about the local plumber or the local florist or the local dry cleaner, right? They're so proud of the role that they play in their community. The local pizza place that's sponsoring the Little League team, they have so much pride in what they do. And what we hear from them is how frustrating it is to be caught up in this anti-business sentiment. They think they've been pillars of the community for how long? And then what people say to them is, well, I don't mean you. I don't mean you, I mean this, or I mean that, as opposed to kind of throwing all of the baby out with the bathwater. But you mentioned something I want to pick up on. The other thing we hear from CEOs all the time is that they can't find workers. And if they can find workers, they can't find workers with the right skills that they want. And so this question of, if we're going to build things in the United States, any kind of things, yes, we need permits, but we also need workers. We also need people who can build things and who are active in the economy. And so when you say you're trying to build an employment value proposition where people want to come work for you for mission and purpose, but also so they can make money and you can make money, that balance is hard.
It's really hard. And again, we're thoughtful about not, the government, again, has done something this morning that was really needed. But I will say, as a small business owner, my taxes alone, and I don't mean the rate of taxes, I mean the process of paying taxes.
Can you tell your story?
This is a mini horror story. Okay, this is a horror story of taxes as a small business owner. So when you have a company, you have to pay estimated taxes every quarter. I started my business during COVID. I estimated some taxes, but how do I know how much money I'm gonna make, right? So I conservatively estimated, and then paid my full taxes on April 15th and got fined $6,000 for not paying enough estimated taxes. And I just thought, I can't even. This is when you just want to get out of it because you think the frustration is just, it's like an aggravation tax. I just paid $6,000 as a small business in the middle of a pandemic for starting a company. And I think that's where the sand in the gears, I don't think it's intentional. I don't think it's meant to make small businesses want to quit their own jobs, but it has the effect quarterly. It's a nightmare.
I used to say that I felt like the government was Godzilla, that it didn't mean to take me out as a small business. It just didn't really recognize me as a life force. So it was just kind of coming through the town and crunching on the car type of situation. I once paid a woman named Ms. Williams at the IRS $5,000 for no reason. I was the CEO and I kept getting these calls that I owed this money and I had all the proof that I didn't owe this money, and I kept sending the IRS this information, and I kept getting phone messages from Ms. Williams saying, I'm here Tuesdays and Thursdays between 10:30 and 12:30 to answer your questions, and I could never get her on the phone. And I finally called a lawyer to say, I'm getting these increasingly threatening notices from the IRS. I have all the proof that I don't owe this money. What do I do? And he said, you pay the money because you're going to pay me more than that. Right? And it was just so frustrating when you're just trying to do the right thing. And so I think DC messing with your startup, part of it is just bigness. The government's just really big. And so when you're really small, it can just feel like Godzilla, even when it's well-intentioned.
Yeah. No, I will tell you, I'm fighting that $6,000. I'm not just paying it. Thank you, Michelle. We've got letters. We're writing letters. But again, it's a drag on my time. I don't want to be penalized for trying to pay my taxes on time. Okay, on that note, ending with me complaining about taxes, which we're getting into tax season. We have a few minutes for questions.
Sure.
And then after we do a few minutes of questions, and you can think about it now, what are you most optimistic about for business?
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question for Suzanne? Dead silence. Yes.
Do you think China's going to overshadow the U.S. in terms of becoming the big business superpower? And what can we do to practically ensure that the U.S. stays the business superpower?
It's a great question. And the answer is I never bet against the United States, so I feel optimistic that we can remain the economic superpower. And I think it's important that we do because of our values in the world, right? Like, we may not be perfect, we have a lot of work to do, but I'd take our values over China's values every day of the week. So I think the answer to your question is we have to kind of stop being self-haters. I mean, this is kind of my point about business. Like, at some point we can say, business can be better, government can be better, we can be better, but we're still the best system that exists in the world, both our system of government and our economic system, right? It's pretty bad except for everything else, right? And so when are we going to admit that and have some pride in it, you know, and do like we do in our own families, which is, you know, you criticize at the dinner table and then you defend like hell outside of the house. And so I think the answer is we have to be really strong and resolute about China when it comes to our national security, our IP enforcement and protection, our the labor, human rights abuses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we have to decide that those are really important things worth fighting. We then have to decide that not everything is a national security threat. Some of the things that small businesses and big businesses export into China create great American jobs, right? And we have to decide that exporting or importing things like ball caps or burgers or Starbucks creating a coffee shop in China is not the same thing as what is our supply chain going to be on semiconductors. And everything being a national security threat is the same thing as nothing being a national security threat. So I think this requires a sophisticated strategy. We actually supported the new House Select Committee on China because the congressman's concept of a bipartisan approach where people would go deep and long and sophisticated on how to contain this threat feels really smart, so we're rooting for it.
And it's definitely an example of both sides of the aisle. I mean, I don't think there's anything in Washington where there's as much agreement as we need to make sure we're being thoughtful about this, not just competitor, but at times adversary. Those are my words, not Suzanne's words.
No, and I think particularly in intellectual property, we were talking yesterday about the fact that, you know, China's stealing a whole lot of our intellectual property and then deciding that they're going to register it with their own patents so that they end up with the rule of law on their side after they stole it. I mean, we're like in some crazy Western movie.
Yeah, you have to pay you have to pay for what was stolen.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a real thing, and I'm glad you asked that question. I think it's one of the biggest issues, but there is a lot of focus on it. I actually don't know that there's as much focus among the general population, but in Washington, it's super hot. Does anyone else have a question? I think we have time for maybe one or two more. Ashley Gold? Ashley's a reporter. Brace yourself.
Okay, I'm ready.
Well, we were talking about the Federal Trade Commission. Folks in this room probably aren't as familiar with it as I am, but there's 3 Democrats on the commission right now. There's no Republicans. What kind of candidates is the chamber supporting to fill
Yeah, and I don't think it's just my feeling, right? I mean, I think we had Republican commissioners who felt that way and felt that they couldn't have their voice heard. We have long-time professionals at the FTC, as you know, quitting under protest and saying, I've built my whole career here, I believe in the mission of this agency, and I can't do my job with this political appointee. You know, this is ridiculous. So I don't think it's just my opinion on what's going on at the FTC, as you know. Look, we would like to see people with real business experience and expertise who understand the M&A world. I think, just like I said, we need more tech people in government. If you're going to regulate mergers and acquisitions, you should probably have a sense of the overall economy. And we'd like to see a return to the consumer welfare standard. Right? This was decades of bipartisan consensus that said the overriding principle on whether or not an acquisition should be approved is what it does for competition and what that impact is on the consumer. And we need to return to that as a fair standard for protecting the consumer without just deciding big is bad.
Let's end with something positive. What are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about all of you and what you're building and what you're doing. I have the world's best job. I get to go out and talk to people all day long who are building businesses or have built successful businesses. And like I said, almost every CEO is optimistic. It's hard to create followership if you're not, right? And so what you can do to solve society's problems, what you can do to make the United States the global superpower and not, as Niki once said, am I allowed to say your quote that I love?
I don't know what it was, but feel free.
Pets on Chinese leashes, I think
Oh
was
yeah,
your
I
quote.
said we were going to end up as pets on the leashes of, middle-class Chinese families. I mean, I did say that. I had just had surgery and I was on trazodone when I said it. But I will say, I'm deeply concerned that we're going to lose our competitive edge and end up sort of, it is a hegemonic race, and like I do worry about that. I probably shouldn't have said that at a dinner, but anyway.
No, I think it's okay.
It was with members of Congress.
I think it's okay to inject some humor into this panel and say, I think that I'm optimistic that the next wave of innovators, the next wave of technologists, the next wave of job creators are going to do what's right for this country, for their communities, for their families, for their employees, for their customers, and they're going to bind together to solve big global challenges. And it's our job to help you do it. And I hope you'll reach out, and I hope you'll call us, and I hope you'll tell us your stories and help you make the world a better place.
America, we're really, really good at innovating. We're really good at it. And so thank you to you in the Chamber for clearing a path to help people do that. And also thanks for taking the time, I think, to humanize the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. It's one of the largest trade associations in the world, certainly in the United States. It's like an aircraft carrier, and I think sometimes people don't totally understand what you do, but I think hearing your nuanced, balanced approach to helping businesses thrive is really helpful and welcome, and thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for coming.